Corporate Finance Excel Practice Problem. In this presentation, we're going to work a practice problem in Excel related to the calculation of interest or dollar cost of loan calculation. Get ready, it's time to take your chance with corporate finance. Here we are in Excel. We have our information on the left-hand side. We're going to put that into the blue area into our worksheet on the right-hand side. Now we're going to be calculating simple interest. We're going to be using our formula down below. Fairly basic calculation here, but there's a couple different ways that you could format this calculation, and I think it's useful to see those multiple different ways to format it so that you can use multiple different ways if necessary and when necessary, depending on the data that is provided to you. And you can recognize that this is basically the same calculation if you see it calculated in a different format than you are used to. It's very nice. It's very useful to see the flexibility of other types of calculations that get to the same area and see that they are the same thing, so that you can work in different contexts. So we have the loan amount. It's going to be the 100,000. We're going to say the days is going to be 60 days. We've got the rate is going to be 15%. What is the dollar cost of the loan, or in other words, the interest? Calculation of the interest formula that is nice to be able just to memorize. Straightforward, simple interest calculation is going to be P times R times T, P being the principal or the loan amount. Typically, if we're saying this is going to be the loan from scratch, loan amount times the rate, interest rate, times T. Now, the confusing thing about this oftentimes is basically making sure that we have the correct amount for whatever P is, as we've seen in prior presentations, and realizing that the rate in and of itself means for a year typically. So when we hear a rate, like if you heard like the mortgage rate on a home loan or something is 5% or something like that, even though you pay monthly, that's basically a yearly rate. So knowing that the rate is basically a yearly rate, then it makes more sense to think about the time, because if the time is something other than a year, then we got to take a fraction of a year basically to figure out what the time will be. So we're going to have to use that time factor to calculate the interest. Also note that once you know this formula, then you can then rework this for the principal or loan amount if you know the rest of it, or the rate or the time. If there's only one unknown, you can use the algebra, in other words. So you don't have to memorize another formula for the principal or loan amount, or the rate if the rate wasn't given and they gave you everything else, which can happen on a loan document, because if they give you everything but the rate, then they've given you everything you need to know to figure the rate, basically. So that's going to be our formula. Now note we can calculate this a few different ways though when we plug this into our information. So note up here we were given the loan term. It's a short-term loan. It's only a 60-day loan. We were given it in terms of days, but we could just as easily have been given this information in terms of months. They could have said it's a 2-month loan, and then we'd have to treat it, how are we going to treat it in that case? So we're going to do our normal practice of taking this information and breaking it out into like a table type of format. Very useful practice to basically understand each component, just basically doing the algebra in a table format to work on your tables. And if you were to use something in practice to have like a worksheet to work through this information, you'd want to build it basically in Excel so you can change your data to the left and just have your worksheet, calculate this for you. So I'm going to do the two calculations kind of like we would have it in a calculator. We're going to multiply the P times R, and then I'm going to take the results of that we would have, and then basically R times the T. T is going to need a subtotal because that is the ratio of a year. So let's just break this out and say, how can we put this in a table if I was doing like a, step-by-step tax return walkthrough kind of process of this calculation. Let's take the loan amount, which would be P. You can call it P. And that's going to, principal or loan, and that's going to be the 100,000, we're going to say. And then we're going to take the rate. So the rate is going to be, of course, R, rate or R. And let's actually type in rate and then put R next to it. So we're going to say rate, and that's going to be equal to the 15%. And I'm going to percentify this, go into the Home tab, percent, and percentifying it, 15%. And then we're going to multiply those two together. I'm going to bring that into the outer column. So that'll be the sub calculation of the P times the R. And this will be equal to the 100,000 times the 15%. And so this would be over here on your thing. And then I'm going to indent these. So I'm going to go selecting these three. And I'm going to say Home tab, alignment, increase the indenting. And I'll increase the indenting here. So we'll say now we have the interest if the loan was for a year. So it's important to note that, because remember, whenever you see an interest rate, it basically means for a year. They didn't give us the interest rate for the time period, which is 2 months or 60 days. they gave you the yearly interest rate. So if the loan were out for an entire year at 15%, then the rent on the loan would be the $15,000 on it. So I'm going to go Home tab, font, and underline. However, the loan wasn't out for an entire year. It was out for only 60 days, and therefore we're going to have to use the time calculation. So the time calculation, what we want to think about is the fraction of a year, and say what percentage, we can think about what percentage of a year do I multiply the 15 by in order to show just the 60-day time period. So I'm going to say, all right, then we're going to say the time is going to be our next calculation. We got to do a little subtotal in order to pick up the time. So we need the days of the loan. Days of loan is going to be, and I need to put that up here. This should be days of loan up top. And that is going to be equal to 60 days. And we are going to compare that to the days in a year, which we're going to assume 360 because we're going to assume a nice 12-month times even 30-day instead of 365 is the other number you might see used in this place. Home tab, font group, and underline. And then that's going to give us the fraction of a year, which is time. All right, let's just say T. And I'm going to highlight these or select them. Home tab, alignment, increase the indenting. I'll increase the indenting here again. Home tab, alignment, increase the indenting. So the fraction of the year is going to be 60 divided by the 360. Let's make that a percent. Home tab, numbers, percentifying it. Let's add a couple decimals. Give it a little bit more detail. Let's underline it. Home tab, font group, and underline. And then that's going to give us the interest or the dollar cost of the loan, which is going to be the $15,000 if it was for an entire year, times the fraction of the year that was the loan actually for, which gives us that $2,500. Now, slight variation, what if they didn't give us the total days, but they gave us the number of months? So we could do a slight variation in terms of months, and this could be useful. It could be a little bit easier. We could say, same thing. I'm just going to copy over the same thing. I'm going to say this equals this item, this equals the loan, this equals the rate, and this equals the interest. This is all going to be the same. I'm going to format paint this whole first part. I'm going to select this whole first part and format paint it over into the second one. Home tab, clipboard, format painter. I'm just going to paint the format all the way over here, and I'm just going to use the same numbers. I'm going to do the same thing. This is going to be the 100,000 times the 15%, and now I'm going to multiply that out, the 100,000 times 15%, and then we're going to calculate the time portion. So we did this times time. Now when we consider the time, they might give us the time in months, so we could say the same thing, months in a year. Now if they gave us months, if they said, hey, it was 2 months, then I might just break it down to days and say that would still be 60 days, right? And you could get into a little confusion on the months. You could say, well, this month has more days than that month, and that's why 365 could be used sometimes, because that would be a more even, more accurate estimate of the number of days in a year. 360 evens out all the months into 30 days. So if they were to say 60 days, then we can break that out into months and say that would be 2 months. Or if they just told us 2 months, then we could either use 2 months, or we can estimate two months times, an average of 30 days, which would be 60 days. Or in some cases, you might actually have to break down the months into more exact 31 days or 30 days within the month. But again, we're going to assume nice even months for our calculation purposes for a 360-day year. And therefore, we're going to say 60 days divided by 30 days in a month, we're going to say would be 2 months. Or they might just give us the 2 months. It was out for 2 months. And then we can say, all right, I'm just going to compare that to the months in a year, which of course is 12 months, which you can just type in there, 12 months. And Home tab, font group, underline, that's going to give us the time, fraction of a year, or T. So fraction of the year or T here, and then somehow I have italicized that. So then I'm going to say, then we have this equals 2 divided by 12, and that's going to give us our same percent. So I'm going to percentify this and add a couple decimals, and then let's put an underline here. Let's put an underline here, home tab, font group, and underline. So we have the same rate, basically same fraction, obviously. Then I'm going to select these three, home tab, alignment, increase the indenting. This one, home tab, alignment, increase the indenting. That's going to give us the, let's just say equals the same, this item. And this will be, this equals the, if it was a year, the interest if it was a year, which would be P times R times the time, the fraction of a year, gives us once again that 2,500. Let's go ahead and format this like that. All right. Okay, so let's try that again. Let's do another one. Let's call this one, I should probably rename this, should be, let's make this number 1, and then let's make this number 2, so we can do that, and this will be number 3 and number 4. Now the other way it's useful to think about this, and I'll start off with the same starting point here that we started off with up top. So same kind of starting point. We're going to say, we're going to calculate the interest if the loan was for a year, which is P times R, and that's going to be the loan amount of the 100,000. We're going to multiply that times the rate, which is going to be, once again, the 15%. 15%. Let's go ahead and format this entire thing. I'm going to say this is going to be the interest if the loan was for a year. I'm going to format the entire first half again. So I'm going to select these cells in the first half, go to the Home tab, Clipboard, Format Painter, and then I'm just going to paintbrush that on down here. That makes this a percent. So same starting point. P times R is going to be, of course, the 100,000 times the 15%, or the 15,000. Now, the other way we can think of the fraction of a year, instead of doing the fraction of a year, we could say, all right, 15,000, that's if it was for an entire year. And we have days here. We have days. So why don't I break this down to interest per day and then multiply it times how many days the loan is covering? So we could then say, from this point, I could say, well, let's just take the number of days in a year, which is going to be, we're going to make it nice and even, 12 times 30. That's going to give us our 360. I'm going to go Home tab, Font group, and underline. And that's going to give us our interest per day. So the interest per day would be equal to the 15,000 divided by the 360. So we got 42 interest per day. So let's make that a little bit, go to the Home tab, numbers, add some decimals. Now this, the decimals could matter here because per day, so then we have the days of the loan. Days of the loan are going, so it's going to be $41.67 about per day. And we're going to say that the loan has 60 days in it. 60 days of the loan. I'm going to underline this, Home tab, Font group, and underline. That will then give us, once again, the interest on the loan, which is going to be the 41 days, $41.67 about per day times the 60 days, which would give us, once again, that 2,500. So another kind of useful way to see it, we can break, as long as it's just doing the same thing as the fraction, but now we're just breaking the fraction down to a per day unit and then multiplying it times the number of days in the loan. Last thing we can do a similar thing, but break down the months. So let's do this one more time. So the top part will be the same again. We're really focusing in on time. So I'm going to say this equals that. This equals the loan amount. This equals the interest rate. This equals the interest if the loan were for a year. Now I'm going to select these items. I'm going to use the Format Painter. We're going to go to the Home tab, Clipboard, Format Painter. Then we will format paint this first half. Now let's pick up the numbers, which are once again going to be the 100,000 times 15. Multiplying that together, the 100,000 times the yearly rate would give us the interest if it were for an entire year. And now we're going to say, well, what if they gave us number of months? If they gave us like 2 months, then we can either break it out into days. We could say, well, okay, 2 months. If I break that out into days, assuming nice even 30-day months, that would be 60 days. Or we could just use the 2 months. Now, days is going to be more useful because days you can break down even if it's part of the year. Part of the month, even if it's like 15 days in a month. So days will be more universally useful, but you will often see it broken down in months. So if they gave us the months, we'd say, okay, well, let's take the months in a year, we know there's 12, we're going to say 12 months in a year. If this is for a year, and I need months here, so many months, then let's break it down to what would interest be per month. So home tab, font group, underline, that's going to give us our interest per month. And we're going to say that's going to be equal to the 15,000 per year divided by the 12 months would give us 1,250. Is that even? Let's go home tab, numbers, and add some decimals. It is. So then we're going to say the months of the loan. So if it costs us 1,250 per month, how many months are in the loan? Well, we have 60 days divided by, we're going to say 30, nice even 30-day months, which would give us 2 months. And then we're going to say, all right, so the interest then would be equal to the 1,250 per month times the 2 months covered, or the 2,500. So notice this is all the same thing, of course. It's all just basically this formula. We're simply breaking out this kind of fraction in different ways. You might see it in different ways, and maybe if you break it out or thinking about it in different ways, it give you a better comprehension of exactly what the calculation is doing.